well, I forget what the statistic is, but like people, I think like 98 or 99% of the world's data has been generated in like the last 2 years or so, or the last 20 years, more so than any other point in the previous 50,000 years of human history. There's been more data created. And that's due to, as you said, technologies like cell phones and people talking about the Internet of Things, so to speak. But if you can hook a sensor up to pretty much anything, like in your house or in an industrial product, you can start to generate data. And that's what they mean by generating data. Um, so there's all this data, but it's one thing to have it, it's one thing to store it, but it's quite another to turn that data into information and to process that data and to whittle it down to the right particular sources that you need, formatted in the particular way, and then analyzed correctly to help a decision maker make a decision. And I think that's the real value of a data scientist, is being able to look at these disparate data sources and then pare them down and to manipulate them correctly, and then to perform a rigorous or robust analysis, whether that's machine learning and predictive modeling, whether that's an evaluation or product um, performance analysis, something like that. So that's, I think, really where a good data scientist comes in. And I think a lot of the techniques and particular methods that data scientists and machine learners and advanced analysts use aren't particularly new. So for instance, there's a lot of buzz now around deep learning, which is based on neural networks, and neural networks have been developed since I think like the 1930s. Support vector machines is another algorithm that had a lot of popularity for a while, but that was developed, I think, originally published in the 1960s. And things like regression, which people are generally more familiar with. Regression has been around for 100 years or more. So these particular methods aren't necessarily new. As I said, there's a long history. What has improved, though, is like computing power. So it's a lot easier to run these algorithms, which previously might have taken an inordinate or an infeasible amount of time to allow you to act on the decisions or the information that was coming out of them. Now the computing power has allowed you to shrink that processing time into a fraction of what it took, 20 years or 30 years before. And so that's really where I think the advancement in the algorithms come from, is in the computing power. But yeah, it's not necessarily new techniques, but being able to apply those techniques in our modern computer age.
Wow. So so basically, in a lot of ways, it's like you mentioned the artificial intelligence, Internet of Things that can help business decisions, especially now, like like with all social media changing, with algorithm changes that's happening right now.
Yeah.
So how can that help with people that's on LinkedIn, especially to be ready prepared for the workplace?
Um, that's something that I think about often. Um, One thing that I like about, for instance, Facebook, is that they're very transparent with what they're trying to, what they want to accomplish with their algorithm changes. And I I like it not in the sense that I necessarily support Facebook, and of course there's been all sorts of controversy around Facebook, and we've all seen Zuckerberg in front of Congress, but it's very clear what their purpose is, right? And that I don't have a Facebook account, but I can tell you that Zuckerberg's purpose is to build community. He wants to build a community and generate conversation and generate good conversation um, around when people post videos or they post content to Facebook. And I know that because I just looked at a BuzzFeed article, or I saw on Facebook's website, there's changes to our algorithm. Here's why we're doing it, and here's our intended goal. It's easy. Like, that's perfect. I think other platforms like LinkedIn are not nearly so clear, and it's very convoluted. And so I'm a pretty regular user of LinkedIn, and I have seen that different themes seem to bubble up to the top of my feed every couple months. Um, and they're around certain topics or certain people or the way people are writing, and it seems that there's not really any clear goal. And so I think that these algorithm changes, if you can anticipate them or you can figure out what is getting good traction, it's definitely an advantage. For LinkedIn, it's a bit more guesswork. And I think that can be frustrating sometimes, at least it has been for me. Um, as far as using metrics on these social media platforms, from the perspective of a data analyst or a data scientist, getting metrics for yourself can sometimes be difficult because the APIs that these social media platforms provide are relatively limited. It's hard to get a full stream of data and be able to construct a data set that really allows you to understand, as I'd imagine as a marketer or something, what's going on and how you can optimize your performance or your views or your engagement on any of these platforms. And these companies know how valuable their data are. And so they're going to make you pay for it. And that's what most people who have data companies have to do. They have to pay for that feed. But I do think that there is some value in some of the basic analytics that you get from LinkedIn or from Facebook. And I've experimented a little bit with trying to put together some data sets for myself of like content that I've posted and kind of what is trended and days of the week and things like that. I have a problem with having a small data set, and so it's hard to find good trends sometimes because I'm not necessarily a regular poster. I think if I were relying on LinkedIn for generating leads and it was a regular source of like content for myself, I'd probably be a little bit more engaged in that. So.
Okay, all right. So you mentioned that LinkedIn is not it's like guesswork. Like what kind of like guesswork? Like like for example, like say like if someone posts an article on on the publisher, and yet not many people see it. Like what do you think that might be difficult for the users there to basically build like a community on that platform?
Yeah, I can't. I've never done like the LinkedIn Premium, so I don't get access to like all the analytics on LinkedIn, and I can't speak for LinkedIn. I can only provide some of my speculation or conjecture. I personally, I think it's hard to figure out specifically why. I can tell that, for instance, just very anecdotally from the posts that I put on, doing things like including hashtags, putting in some commentary, not posting like post after post after post. You see, it seems that I'll post and then that'll gain some traction, but if I immediately follow up with follow-on posts, those posts don't get as much traction. So, um, I've just seen some very basic things like that, and I've never really bothered to dig into it too much. I think something that LinkedIn fundamentally suffers from that Facebook doesn't is that they don't know what they're doing in terms of building community, in my opinion. And I'm sure if a LinkedIn rep sees this, they'll rail against me and tell me how completely wrong I am. But for instance, they had LinkedIn groups, and everybody keeps saying every year, LinkedIn is going to kill off their groups. And then they had groups with like a separate app on the mobile devices. Now they've killed off the groups app, but it's not clear to me how to get back to groups. these LinkedIn topic groups on the main LinkedIn app, and the functionality is still limited. So it doesn't seem like they know what they're doing with groups. That leads me to just typically focus on my main page. My main page is usually filled with, it seems kind of like LinkedIn's algorithm favors 3 or 4 people every couple months, and I see nothing but post and post and post by 3 or 4 people, and then somehow the algorithm changes. I suspect the algorithm changes reactively because people are complaining and writing how much the algorithm sucks, on LinkedIn. And then I get 3 different people's posts, and sometimes it's about, right now the theme is how do I become a data scientist? And I got 3 or 4 people every time I open the app. This is how you become a data scientist, and it's these really long posts about becoming data. And then a couple months ago, it was like I had getting a lot of posts about data science and methodology and data science and this and that. And then for a while, I was getting nothing. It was really random about it was like tangentially related to healthcare, and I didn't really know what was going on. And maybe I've tried to unfollow a lot of people. I've tried to, comment only on certain topics, specifically healthcare and a few topics around data science, not everything. Data science is pretty broad. So it's hard to really trigger, I think, really funnel or channel what your feed is and who your audience is. And maybe there's people who are using LinkedIn for marketing leads or something who could prove me wrong or show me a method. And if they can, I'd appreciate it, actually. If someone can give me the secrets to cracking LinkedIn. And I did briefly look at Facebook, but groups just didn't interest me as much. So the audience was kind of there on LinkedIn. So it's where I am, what I'm
That's
going.